soon as we see, is Willem with Carlos, or is Willem coming in by himself? All right, everybody hear me out there? It's on, not muted?
Yep, you're just fine.
Can anybody hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
All good.
So, first of all, we'll get going right now. I'm gonna just say thank you to everyone for, a great weekend. We had a little bit of everything and a lot of great participation. And so we're really looking forward to this debrief. And then, Greg has done an awesome job of leading, coaching, and bringing in the pros to also get involved with this debrief, which makes this very strong. So I want to thank everybody. And just so people understand, I will be sending an email out. I'm just going to confirm with Kat about next event. But right now the plan is we'll do a Thursday practice, Friday, Saturday, Sunday event. Anyone that was at this event will be invited, and then it'll be up to them on whether or not I'm allowed to add a couple more, which I do have on my waiting list. So I'm hoping we're going to have 30 plus boats and be allowed to have it. So I want to thank everyone, and I'm going to turn it over to Greg to get going. And Greg, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Ed. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And for those of you that joined us on Thursday and Friday this past weekend, it was a super weekend of sailing. Certainly, we had every condition you could have, and it was really great to have that kind of sailing available to us. And Ed, thanks for making that all happen. And like Ed said, I look at my role here tonight and these past two debriefs as just the moderator. And we have some incredible talent, and Victor, Zeke, Willem, Jonathan, and Taylor, who have been willing to join us again tonight and share their expertise, and willingly so. And they've been trading texts back and forth with us all day. So it's really cool that they're taking of their time to share and offer all they know. And what we are going to do, oh, and another person we really need to thank, because you'll see a lot of his work tonight, is Roy Ingham. Roy is the drone guy for us. He got a lot of great drone footage on Saturday and on Sunday morning, that one race. So I think we got some good stuff to show you. And what we're going to try to do tonight is use this video that we have more of a backdrop. And I'm going to ask questions of the guys. And you can see on the side there in the chat room, that is our agenda, if you will. And it doesn't mean we're going to follow that to the T. And I'm hoping that everybody will chip in. And I know there are a lot of other great sailors on this call that I hope also will chip in as well, like Travis for sure. And anybody that would like to add something in. But we want to try to keep it moving along, because as we put this together and I looked at the agenda, I realized we might be here till 1:30 in the morning. So if you get tired, feel free to jump off. But we do want to try to keep this as close to an hour and 15 minutes as we can. So with that, I'm going to start it off. And as you can see, our first topic is main trim and balance. And we've assigned Zeke to lead this one. And again, the videos we're going to show are not necessarily what Zeke might live and die by as far as what he's going to discuss. So just be a little bit of an outline. So Zeke, why don't what you expressed interest in was, talking about main trim, talking about some of the tools, that help you get the main set right. But you also really were enthused to talk about balance and the communication you as the main trimmer have with the skipper, you and John, and your communication. So why don't you take it away from there, and feel free to just chat about what's important.
Cool. Thanks, Greg. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so the first thing that kind of came to my mind when we were talking about this main trim, the idea of balance and everything, is, gosh, what a team sport this is, because everybody on the boat has a lot to do with the balance of the boat. And I think with the ultimate goal of being to keep the kind of angle of heel as constant as you can. And certainly on a day like we had on Saturday, where the breeze was anywhere from 6 knots at times to 20 or 50 knots, it felt like at some times. And it really starts with, I think, kind of the tactician or the main trimmer and the driver deciding, if there's a specific mode they need to be in, whether it be high mode or just regular VMG sailing or a little fast forward mode. But that really even starts from what the guys on the rail are reporting. So we have our forwardmost guy, Will Felder, is calling the breeze shots, and he's trying to kind of narrate if we're in a light spot for how long, and then when the next puff is coming. And Zach is really trying to do a big picture, where is the most breeze? So he'll say things like, high keeps you in the pressure, or high gets you to the next pressure, or, there's nothing high and we need to be in a fast forward mode. So starting from there, it kind of dictates if we want to be in a different mode. And then, with Will counting down those pressures, it kind of helps me decide what I need to adjust next to help John keep the boat on as steady an angle of heel as he can be. So, on a day like Saturday, the main trimmer has to be doing the main sheet, the backstay, and the traveler. For the most part, I could kind of leave the traveler, and I had it cleated for the most part, just about 1 or 1.5 car lengths up from center. And I felt like that was a pretty good spot for most of the day. I think I mentioned after racing Saturday, there were lulls that were big enough where the only thing I could do to kind of capture the boat from coming back to too flat was to just pull a bit of traveler up and just stop the boat from coming to too flat too fast. So the communication to John is usually not all that much, because John's got a really good feel for it and he knows how to drive the heel angle. We've got a heel angle monitor or indicator on the boat digitally, so he knows kind of what the target is and what feels right. But what we will tell John is, if we want to be in a fast forward mode, and he knows he can be a little heavy on the jib telltales, and I'll make sure that the main leech is a little bit more open to help get the bow down. And then, if we're coming into a light spot, we'll kind of count down into that light spot. And that's where it gets tricky, is you kind of have to decide where you already are in your range. So you're sailing along and you're either at your max backstay or you're kind of loose on the backstay. And, if you're already loose on the backstay for your setting, and Will says there's another big lull coming, well, then you know that you don't have any more backstay to give to power the boat up. So the next move is going to be, tight on the main sheet if you need to capture that way, or the traveler up. Or if we're already at 100% on the backstay and the boat's kind of heeling over and Will says there's another big puff coming, well, then I know I don't have any more backstay to pull on. I got to dump the main sheet, which means I need to have enough tension on the vang that the boom's not going to go up when I ease it. So it's really helpful to have those guys kind of dictating what the next move is going to be, so I know which line to adjust next. And that translates then back into making sure that if the boat's already kind of on a flat side of the heel and we've got the main trimmed hard and we're trying to power up, if Will's reporting another lull coming, then I'll make sure to tell John to be sure to keep the bow up in this next light spot and not let the bow kind of fall down if the boat, does get too flat.
That's good. Zeke, can I just ask a real quick question? You mentioned you'd pull the traveler up, and then you also mentioned another time you might trim the main. How would you decide if you want to keep twist versus, and keep the main eased a little bit and pull the traveler up versus just standing on the main sheet and trimming that in tighter?
I think a big part of it is how fast you're already going and kind of how hooked up you already are. So if you've been sailing in kind of 12 to 15 knots and the boat's really hooked up, you're going fast and you're going high already, and you're starting to kind of fall into a lighter spot, and especially if the water is a little bit flat, then the next thing I'm going to do is really step on the main sheet kind of too hard and sort of over trim the main to the point where the leech is going to close just for a short amount of time, because that's going to help capture that heel angle, but it's also going to help the boat get the absolute most height out of the fact that we're already kind of hooked up and moving fast. Whereas if it's already maybe a little bit lighter, or there's some chop, or we're sailing in traffic and we really need extra juice to keep the bow up and keep a little bit of extra heel, and then in an acceleration mode, then I'll go to the traveler and pull that up and make sure that the main sheet goes out a click to twist the main a little and keep us in acceleration mode.
Gotcha. Okay. So here's another one of you guys going up one, Zeke, obviously on Friday when it's thumping pretty well. And this will slide into, Jonathan talking about the jib and the trim there. But why don't you just touch on this, or can I ask you a question first? You mentioned the range of adjustments on a day like that, where it was really up and down and shifty. You could sail into a big lefty here, or you could sail into a big knock and a big shot of breeze at the same time. What is your range you're going through to keep the boat balanced, or is it one of those deals that just doesn't matter, whatever it takes?
It's definitely whatever it takes, but I'd say, what I was just talking about before, looking at that video of Taylor and those guys, it was a little bit lighter. Once you get into this much breeze that we have here, the traveler is not going to move at all until there would have to be, almost half as much breeze as you see in this photo or video to need me to pull the traveler up. So a very important thing to focus on, and we've been talking about it a lot, but the gross backstay tune is incredibly important. So you have to make sure that every time you're adjusting your rig and looking upwind, you're adjusting your gross back tune for the backstay tune to be set up for the conditions. Because if your gross backstay is not tight enough, you won't be able to get the backstay on hard enough. I generally try to live sailing upwind somewhere between 60 and 90% of maximum backstay in conditions like this, which, as long as the gross tune is set right, which it was about as hard as I could pull the gross tune on this day. It's probably 6 feet of rope going through the cleat on the backstay that I'm adjusting, and then it's just main sheet from there. So it's important to have the vang snugged, but I don't think you want to pull the vang really hard. And Victor talked about this last time. The problem with the deck stepped mast is the more vang you pull on, the more you're just bending the bottom of the mast and actually softening the headstay, which is not what we want to do in big breeze. So get the vang on tight enough so that when you ease the main, the boom goes out and not up. And then it's all, in this much breeze, it's all backstay and main sheet. So I was probably going through maybe 2 to 3 feet of main sheet through the cleat in the puffs and lulls, and that kind of 6 feet on the backstay.
Wow, great, great. And I'll ask one more question and then we'll let the other guys chip in here. But we talked a little bit on, I think it was Thursday night, about the Outhaul Tension, excuse me, and how easy it is to over bake it in breeze. And just looking here, you guys certainly have the Outhaul type, but you don't have the bottom of the main inverted or pulled so tight that the lower leach is super straight. Can you just touch on that and how often you mess with that upwind?
Yeah, I never adjusted upwind unless we've forgotten to put it on around a leeward mark, but we've got marks for the outhaul just like we do on the jib sheets and everything else, so we know where we kind of want it. And I will add that if you're just luffing your main before the start, you look at your outhaul, it's always going to look a lot looser than when you're trimming in and going upwind. So I think a lot of folks will pull the outhaul on so that it's kind of strapped when they're in the just pre-start sailing around, and then when they trim in and sail, it's at the bottom of the main inverts like you're talking about. So it's definitely an interesting topic. We were going up with the Stampede team, and they generally seem to sail with their outhaul a little flatter than we do, or a little tighter than we do. I listened to the debrief from the other night, and Mike Ingham was talking about having enough. You got to have power somewhere in the sail, and I think in these really windy, kind of lumpy conditions, you don't want it in the top because you'll tip over, but you want to keep it down low a little bit. So. And just keep a little bit of that return in the bottom part of the main as well. So I generally look for it to be off the boom, 2 inches or so when it's this breezy, but I haven't been able to make the super tight work for me, but I know Jonathan has, so maybe we can transfer over to Jonathan and let him talk about that too.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, before we get to the jib, and I was going to ask a question that I think will feed right into Jonathan, is when the main starts to break up in a big puff, what's one of the first things you do? And that'll fit into that. But does anybody else have points they want to make about the main before we get into the jib trim and let Jonathan do his thing? Taylor, you're the trimmer for Laura. Have anything you want to add there?
No, I mean, Zeke touched on most of it. Biggest thing is just always trying to keep the foils engaged, and it does require a lot of main sheet play. Keeping that heel angle, just having that steady line of communication, I think with the driver is really important, so that, you telling the driver like, oh, I have more main sheet to give you, like, let's work on a little bit higher mode. I think that's all like really important communications that you're talking with the helmsperson, that, if you need to change modes, that you're going to do it together and that you're on the same page. So I think that's really important. But yeah, as Zeke said, it requires a lot of attention, and I think in order to make these boats go well in puffy, wavy, shifty conditions, I think you need to just be constant on the main sheet, nonstop. And the main sheet's your fine-tune adjustment to, keep the boat tracking and going well through the water, and then your traveler's kind of more of your mode change or condition change adjustment, as Zeke mentioned. If we see a big change in velocity, that's when you're going to be changing the traveler in these conditions.
Gotcha. Good point. Anybody else?
I would just add to that real quick. I totally spot on, but I think it's also important that the driver, it should be two-way communication. So the driver, if they're starting to feel a dead stick or just need a little more power or need to be dumped because they're heeling up too much or loading up too much, they really have to dictate that to the main trimmer quickly. And John does a great job of that, just saying, I could use a little more juice back here, and then I know I got to give him either a little backstay ease or a little main sheet on or a little trap up, something.
That's good. Well, can I ask something? So Taylor, you said something, and we all know what, this is the thing we want to strive for, flow over the blades. But I think for a lot of us, we don't know exactly how we make that happen, or what it feels like if we've lost it, and how important it is to keep that. Can you just briefly describe what, how you're there and what you're doing to keep it there?
Yeah, it is hard to describe, but I think a lot of it comes from starting with just consistent heel angle. The more the consistent heel angle is, the more the boat's just going to track straight through the water, and the less you're going to have to move the helm. So for me, the goal is to, be making micro adjustments on the helm, and while like making micro adjustments on the main sheet as well. You're not trying to make these drastic changes. You're trying to work together as a helmsperson and a main sheet trimmer to make sure that that heel angle is locked in, and that you're not going to be making these drastic changes. And I think, yeah, obviously the more you sail with someone, the easier that becomes. And but yeah, I think again, just trying to always be attentive to each other's needs, and like Zeke was saying, like just the feeling of the boat. The boat's just easy to sail, tracking through the water in a straight line.
Gotcha. That's great. Well, Jonathan, anything you want to add about the main before you get into the jib? Anything?
No, it's all great stuff, guys. And I can't second enough what Taylor was saying about the heel angle. That's really the key to this whole thing working. If you can sail upwind at the constant correct heel angle in each condition and trim the sails and be able to do all that with the minimum of steering, then you're going to be going fast.
Hey, real quick, Jonathan, sorry to interrupt. Zeke, did you guys, I know you said you had a heel angle number on your instrument. I think at one point I mentioned to Laura, like no more than like 19 degrees of heel. I think was kind of our threshold. Did you guys have a number that for anyone else that has the technology on their boat? Do you have a number that you were going by?
Yeah, on Saturday we were trying to live in the 16 to 19 range. Yeah, if it was 20 or more, it was way too much, and I thought it became a little bit underpowered, less than 16. So, and we mentioned that as well. That's a really good point. It's just communicating that what the target heel angle is, and some days it's a wider range than others, and that was kind of a wide range to so up and down. But I think in that 16 to 19 range is as much as you want to have on a day like that.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to us. Anytime we got over 19 degrees, it felt pretty tough to keep the boat going forward and not sliding sideways. Thanks.
Good. That's a good point. So Jonathan, talk about the jib and maybe, first even mention what it does for the main and this kind of breeze and what you're looking for with it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure there's people that are more qualified than I to talk on this, so feel free to chip in anybody. I thought, the real goal of the jib trimmer is precision, and to really be trimming it to exactly the right place, like the same place every time. So repeatability and precision, because it really doesn't change very much through the conditions. 2 inches on the leeward sheet is a lot, and maybe your windward sheet might be going through a little more range, but again, it's fine gradations. And same thing with the halyard. You use the range of like 2 inches maybe. So make sure you have really good marks and spend enough time before the race, getting all those numbers, right on. The other 2 things to look at aside from that is the marks on the spreader. I think they are pretty useful. It's like we never go to the inner mark, and usually live like between the second and third mark out. It seems to be a good place for those kind of conditions. Also looking at the leach telltales. I tend to like to keep them flowing nicely, but there are conditions in flat water, especially, that having them on the verge of stalling is faster. If you're able to maintain that little higher groove, it is better. And I think we saw some of those conditions on Saturday. It's sort of that 8 to 14, fairly smooth water, I thought. So you can trim the jib pretty tight. You're going to close to maximum in-haul most of the time, I think. The only time we were really easing the in-haul a lot was when we got overstood on the port lay line. The halyard's sort of firm, but not tight, not just a hint of horizontal wrinkles, I would say, is what we're targeting for the halyard. And again, with the jib leach telltales, like not stalling, but looking like they are almost stalling for most of the time. We find we can kind of find one jib lead that is good, that seems to be good through that whole range. So we don't do a lot of changing of the jib lead once you find the sweet spot. But there may be some other views on that issue. And I'd say the only exception to that is in like under 5 knots, you have to go through a significant mode change with the jib setup. And since you don't have enough load to be able to in-haul, you're basically then just going like 2 or 3 cars forward and using no in-haul. let's see.
Jonathan, can I ask you something real quick? You mentioned, in medium flat water, you will trim and the telltales will, even be starting to show a stall. Will you have backwind in the main at that point? Will that start to develop, or is that a no-no?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not afraid of backwind in the main at all. I think a little bit of backwind is often good. When the main blows up, that's a different story, and that usually means your jib's too tight. So that's when, in that condition, like in those bigger pots, that is a really good time, I think, to play the in-hauler, where at the beginning of the bigger pots, if you're able to pop a couple inches of in-hauler, that it lets the upper leach open and keeps the main from inverting.
Gotcha.
So Jonathan, real quick, there is a question, and the question is, how far back does your lead need to be able to max in-haul?
We're on the number 6 mark, which is measuring from the front. So the hole for the track is in the 6th full hole. I don't know if that means anything to anybody else, but I don't know. It's a trade-off for sure, because if you go further back, you can sheet tighter and you can in-haul more. But there's the danger of the foot of the jib getting too flat. If you're too far forward, the lower leach gets too tight and you can't in-haul as hard, is kind of the trade-off.
So, Jonathan, what's your base lead? That probably will help.
6.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay.
Go to 6, leave it there, lock it down.
That's good. That's good. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add to that? Jonathan, can I ask something? I know a lot of people have talked about the weather sheet being so important that when they come out of attack, they even have the bow person grab the weather sheet before the trimmer gets a chance to pull it on, to hold some weather sheet on to make the bottom of the jib deeper while they're accelerating. Do you guys get into it that deep? Is it that
Yep.
important to you? Okay.
It is, and that's the target, is to get because the whole setup is dependent on the relationship of those 2 sheets. So if you've only got leeward sheet and it's conditions that you need weather sheet, then your jib's going to be too flat and too twisted, which may not be what you want for the acceleration out of the tack. So if that forward crew is able to jump on the in-haul, that's fantastic.
Great.
Hey, Jonathan, just to clarify, which jib are you using when you're talking about your leads?
We use the J6.
Okay, and Zeke, you guys, the Imperia team, are they on the J2 high clue, correct?
Yeah, we're J2 high clue. Yep. And I think Jonathan made one really good point about when the main does blow up, what has to happen. And I know like our guys play that in-hauler kind of constantly going upwind. They're always adjusting it. But if ever they hear the main start to blow up, they just dump the in-hauler right away. And that gets the main going again. So I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, very, very similar on our team as well. Anytime the main is starting to flog, you need to get the in-hauler off immediately and settle down the main. That's obviously the biggest sail on the boat, and you can't be dragging it around the race course.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions or?
I just have one other minor point to make. There's times when you get stuck with more sag than you would want for the conditions. For maybe, you'd set up too loose, or the back stays off because you're in point mode or whatever. You do have to be a little careful and modify your jib trim ever so slightly to account for that. I mean, essentially you're dropping the front of the jib to leeward. And so you need to be careful that the back of the jib is not, too far to windward. So I think a little ease on the sheet or a little ease on the in-haul when you have those conditions where you have more sag. So the sail sort of stays in the correct attitude to the wind.
That's a real good point. Would the telltales still dictate that for you too, Jonathan?
They should. Yep, definitely.
Okay, cool. Any other questions? This is good stuff. Anybody
I would
want
just
to
add
add
there
anything?
to Jonathan's point, because we dealt with this on one of the practice days of if you ever feel like the helmsman's having a difficult time driving and especially keeping the bow up when it's really windy, that's often because, as Jonathan was saying, you have a little too much headstay sag, and the only way to get rid of that is a little ease on the jib, which lets the bow ride up a little bit more. So if it's ever like heeling to leeward, but the bow wants to turn down, which is the worst feeling you could possibly have in a sailboat, your immediate move is to get the jib eased a little bit.
Gotcha. Good. Travis, anything you want to add? Any suggestions?
This is
No, I
Willem.
think those guys
Oh.
covered pretty much everything there. It's interesting to hear the different modes with the jib. We have a similar jib to the J2 high clue. And so, yeah, I noticed we were under rig tune on Saturday at one point, and as soon as we released the inhauler, just, an inch or two, all of a sudden we could go upwind. I mean, you could see the head stay twist and the back end come into the main a little bit. So that's something that we tried to focus on it. And, after that, we tried to get the rig right, but you do get caught like that. So no, these guys did a great job.
Good, good. Willem, thanks, Travis. Willem, you had something there. Sorry.
Yeah, I have a couple little things to add. So the top part of the backstay, you can see this is a Victor and Pamela, I believe, and it's fairly short. So the V is quite high. And John Heaton looked like it was actually even higher from the last shot. So that gives them a little more range with their backstay. So that's going to help. Now, every time if I'm going to hold my arm on the inside to banjo the jib sheet, the in-haul constantly, then I'm taking like 25 pounds, maybe more like 40 with me, but taking a lot of weight off the rail. I'm kidding. To in-haul more and play the in-haul more. So what I try to do is really get the communication better so that I can avoid playing that so much. Because if the puff calls are excellent and the driver is expecting the puff and the main trimmer is expecting the puff, then we can go backstay on, main sheet out, and we can avoid playing the in-haul or potentially being caught too soft and with a forestay that's too soft and then rounding up, So, and I think sailing on other boats has helped me. So in Amelgus 24, you can play the shrouds. So anytime you just see yourself pinching a lot, you would say, we got to tighten the rig. So instead I say we're under rigged. So we're loose on the rig and I say tight leeches. So that means less in-haul, more sheet, more main sheet, lower traveler, more backstay, all those things to go because we're a little caught out of range. And then the opposite would be, okay, our rig is too tight. Well, then you're going to go less backstay, more traveler up, less outhaul, more in-haul, all those sort of things. So a really clear communication of how we are on the rig is key, and calling those puffs and waves really well and avoiding all those little hiccups. Every time the boat heels a little more than we want, like Zeke was talking about, we slide sideways and we lose about 5 or 6 feet. So if we can just avoid all those little spots, you're maybe 10, 15 boat lengths faster on a beat.
That's good. That's good. Both you and Zeke, Willem, pointed out the value of getting the rough tune super tight. I mean, Zeke, you said you pulled as hard as you could on it. I got to say, on Friday when I was cruising around on a motorboat, I saw a lot of boats with the backstay basically bottomed out. So that might be something. Could you guys just touch on that again, Willem? Just say how you're gauging where you start with that, because it seems like that's pretty important for headstay sag and getting enough bend and being able to have the oomph to do it.
Sure. So some bridles are just too short, or some top part of the backstay is just a little too long. So some people are bottoming out way before they should, and they think they're fully on the coarse tune backstay, but they're a quarter the tension that I might have, because So if that is the case, sometimes, let's say I adjusted on the starboard side, I would tie a bowline on the port side to take up, say, 6 inches of line out of the bridle. And now it puts the ring another 6 or 7 inches higher on the starboard side. So now I have more play. I would say you want it to be roughly 2 feet, that ring to be above the transom, so you have a huge range.
Yeah, let me jump in here real quick on a technical side of things. You know, obviously everything that these guys are talking about is correct. But what other people might not know is there was a set length for that upper backstay, which was 25 feet. So you can measure your own if you wanted to. The class has opened it up that you can go any length you would like. Just the ferrule has a size now. And so it's a lot smaller than actually the factory one. So it's smaller. But anyways, when they're saying this height difference, most people are then at least taking a foot off. And when they're saying, you know, some people are way further up, then they're, you know, maybe 2 feet up. So you get much shorter than 23 feet and it gets pretty far up there. And that's then going to kind of go the other direction. But if you want to measure your own, I would tell you the shortest I've ever made is 23 feet. Most are making 24 feet. But that's where this is coming into play. And so when Willem's saying, well, now I need to do a bowline, we are still fine tuning that bridle then because of the fact that this change just was made. So.
Gotcha.
Now, of course, when you know, as that V goes higher and higher, you're increasing windage. You know, and there's a lot of things we're trying to do to get rid of that windage. If you have some people out there on this day had the bungee going, and that's a lot of windage. And of course, you don't need the bungee to pull the blocks up. It's blowing 18 knots. So there's some things we got to think about windage and range of the backstay. But like Ed said, you know, 23 feet, 22 and a half feet, whatever. But maybe in Davis Island, the shorter one is the best because we saw 7 knots to 21 knots in one race sometimes. So that's where you want the massive range of a shorter top backstay.
Gotcha.
Anyway,
Okay.
Something to think about. But my main point was the better we can communicate the pressure, the less we bring our arm in. Because once you start turning sideways and banjoing the in-haul, and uncleating it and cleating it, I just try to keep improving my communication. And if I was with Carlos, and if we get this really down with the timing perfect, we can avoid myself and I can hike as hard as the rule permits.
Gotcha.
So.
Gotcha. Super. Okay. Well, Willem, you're up next on going downwind. We're going to talk about various modes. And this is just kind of a jazzy picture of Team Heaton cruising downwind, but maybe you could just kick this off as just to use this as a background to just talk about what you're looking for weight wise, when you're going to be on the step, and, you know, just go through the deal. That would be cool.
Yeah. So there's a few different ways to do this. You know, they're in their same pattern. John looks like he's in the very back and Zeke's next. And then it's, I believe, Felder trimming, I'm guessing. Anyway, so they're looking their normal pattern, while some tacticians might go behind the driver, but their weight placement looks great. The leeches of the jib and the kite look nice. You know, we've got the traveler. I believe Zeke's got it all the way to the bottom. So then when he plays the main sheet, he can really play the leech. So I think they look pretty good there on a pretty hot plane.
So speak to that, Will, and that's kind of interesting. You make sure that, and maybe this is just normal stuff, but the traveler's all the way to leeward. So when he trims the main, he's going to close the leech. When he opens it up, uses the main, obviously it's going to open up, but that's the point there. Is that what?
Yeah, so the communication should be really good, maybe before even the set. Definitely planing, and then as we're hoisting, the tactician knows to drop the traveler all the way down, and the bow guy knows the jib's going to stay out, and we're going to go right into hoist and into high mode, and just ideally start rolling boats out of the set. So as long as we know that we're going to move our weight back, and maybe if it's windier and choppier than this, Zeke would go behind John. And, so the communication has to be really good. And we struggled a little bit. We got better as a team by calling the puffs, because in Davis Island, it was really tricky. Sometimes we'd be fully planing weight back and it would turn into 6 or 7 knots, and I didn't hear much, and that got better and better with time. But if I don't hear much, we're too slow to go weight forward. We're too slow to head up. So the communication has to be just as good downwind as it is upwind. And it's harder to see. It's hard for the bow guy to turn enough to see the breeze. So a lot of times the tactician has to really help. When the tactician goes behind the driver, it's really easier for him to call, because he's more comfortable. He's not sitting between two people. So those are a couple things. And if we can communicate, okay, it's going to be displacement in 5, 4, 3, then the weight goes forward. Driver knows he turns down, say 25 degrees. We use that weight to turn down. We roll the jib, we ease the kite, we ease the main. If it's long-term, maybe we pull the traveler up. The outhaul is always eased on the run, pretty much regardless of the breeze. So we won't be changing that. But the backstay, I can see Zeke's got it not down. He's got it pretty far up near the top. So there were probably some windier spots that he put it on harder, because if it's a little too loose, you'll see the forestay and the jib start flopping, and that's a pretty good telltale that you need more backstay. As the breeze gets strong.
Willem, can you explain when you look at, like here, the boat looks very good. The bow's just out, the weight placement's good. But what do you look at, either on the bow or the heel to, decide to move forward or backwards for some teams that may have struggled with that?
So like a Melgus 32, everyone hikes as hard downwind as upwind. It's a huge spinnaker. You get the apparent going faster, and you sail deeper and deeper. This boat is a little less powered up, so the communication has to get a little better. And as soon as it gets lighter, we need to acknowledge that and go into more of maybe the next mode for these guys is a lazy plane. And maybe everyone scoots one butt forward. We get a little bit weight in. We sail 5 degrees lower. We're still planing, but there's less backstay. So that'll give a lot of power when you blow the backstay. So those are a couple little tricks.
Well, we have a question on the vang when you're going from lazy planing to normal planing. Can you explain the vang in those situations?
Yep. So you're kind of thinking like, okay, so if the traveler's all the way down, we play the main sheet, we really control the boom up and down, and that's great for ripping planing. And as we go into more of a lazy plane, the tighter leech will be better, and you could almost have the traveler in the middle, but instead you could put some vang on. That'll be the easier control, because probably the next thing coming is a big puff. So I would say as you start going into lazy plane, it's weight forward, weight to leeward, and a little more vang and a little less backstay.
Gotcha.
This is Zeke here, just jumping in. I thought that was really well said, Willem, and it was something we were trying at this moment, but kind of all weekend, was keeping the vang tighter. We just sort of heard there's been some pretty fast teams that are going tight vang and more eased vang in the lazy plane to full plane range of things. And it did seem to make it a little bit easier for us, I think, because when we were starting to get a little bit less pressure, but it was still planing, a flick or a pump with the main sheet, all keeping the whole leech on through that pump would really help John get the bow up quick before we lose too much speed. So it's kind of something we were experimenting with, and I thought it was a positive takeaway, and not full rip, as you said, but when I'm still able to be in front of John, and we're totally under control, keeping a tight vang seemed to make it easier to stay on the step.
I think it's easy in Davis Island when the breeze dies to be, too much weight back, too loose on the vang, too tight on the backstay, and you're losing a lot of power there. So I agree with you, Zeke. Gotcha. A lot of the Melgus 32, a lot of people kind of thought this way, that you had to have the vang off, and we went more and more backstay, and I mean more and more vang, and I think we were really great downwind because of that. So I think you got to feel it out. I think the wave state makes a big difference. As it gets choppier, you have to sail a higher angle, and less vang is good. As it gets flatter, more vang, more lazy plane style. So, but good thoughts, I think.
Great. Good. Well, thanks. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Well, super. I'm going to stop sharing now, and Roy is going to take over. And our next discussion will be led by Taylor. You're going to talk about tacking. Is that okay? Taylor, you all good?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me is one thing that I've been working a lot on as far as kind of leading the discussion about when attack is coming is just always trying to have like super consistent communication. I think the more consistent you can be with the communication, the easier it's going to be for everyone. And, everyone kind of knows your timing of when things are going to happen during the maneuver, and, what to expect and when it's all going to happen. So at least on our boat, I talk a lot, as some people might know, at least the people that have sailed with me. But, for me going into attack, I'll say something like stand by. I'll say stand by tack, and then I'll go into attacking in 3, 2, 1. And, that's when the turn starts initiating. And I try to say the same exact words every time. Like, every maneuver that we do, if we're going downwind, I say stand by jibe, jibing in 3, 2, 1. And, oftentimes you have to accelerate that if, there's a boat coming or something, and you're getting to an issue quicker than you were expecting. Stand by tack in 2, 1. You can just make slight alterations to that. But I think the more consistent you can be with the communication, the more your crew is going to be ready for every maneuver, and I think that's really important.
Hey, Taylor,
So going into that tack.
can I ask
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, dude. During the, I'm watching the graphic of the turn. You're coming through. There's a turn and there's a bow back up. Is that a light oversteer there? I've noticed maybe it's good for the acceleration. Or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah, so
See how the
I'll get into that. I was
down?
definitely going to talk about. Yep. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying that as I noticed that that as you exit right there, we're watching it. See how the tiller goes down as she crosses. Is that a light oversteer in the tack?
In my opinion, I don't think so.
Okay.
My whole goal is to have when we're finishing the tack, I always like to say that the foil should be going straight through the water. But I think if in the lighter conditions, when you are looking for a little bit more power, this is, I think, the end of our first practices on Thursday. We're looking for a bit more power out of the maneuvers. So for me, coming out a little bit deeper and then a slight turn up is okay. But you do want that foil, that rudder, to be almost on center line while you're flattening the boat, to make sure that the thing's going to engage and the boat's going to go forward rather than turning as you're flattening. Because
Right.
the rudder will stall if you flatten while it's turned too aggressively. But in this tack, it definitely, all the flow stays attached, and Laura does a great job.
One thing, Taylor, that can I just point out that's interesting? Laura pushes the helm down just over the side of the tank there. And
Yes.
I did notice a lot of boats that the driver would basically jam it hard to lure to make the boat tack real fast. And I think that what you just said is a real good point, that if you tack too hard, too fast, and you drag the rudder, it's just going to be drag and slow the boat down, right?
Absolutely. And I don't know if you guys can notice, if you look closely, you can see that the turn is actually, or the rudder movement is actually accelerating throughout the turn. So, as she goes into the tack, she does a small turn, taking as much VMG up as you can while you're at max boat speed. And then, when you're starting to lose power, that's when you start to accelerate the turn a little bit. So again, watching the tiller going into this, it gets to about the end of the traveler initially, and then she pushes it over the tank as we start to get closer to head to wind to finish the tack and just get through the breeze. Because at that point, you're basically just dragging your sails as you're head to wind. So for me, getting through the tack is really important, but at the same time, not oversteering. So I think it's very
I
condition
think that's
dependent.
it's a super important point that
Sorry,
Taylor is making, because if you just jam the helm down, it acts as a brake, and beginning with a soft turn, the boat doesn't slow, and then save the hard turn for when you're head to wind.
Yeah, but and also in breezier conditions, I think you actually almost have to turn a little bit more aggressively and make the turn happen a little bit quicker. Because these boats are light, they're, dinghies, and, they do slow down a lot. So, as soon as the sails start luffing in big breeze, your foils are starting to detach, and, you're going to start to slow down really aggressively. So in the bigger breeze tacks, trying to just get through the turn is almost the priority, and keeping the flow over the foils. It's that fine balance of turning hard enough to get through the tack quickly, but also not too hard to, disrupt flow over the rudder. And then
Did you,
Taylor, how are you coaching the driver on that? I find I'm not all that standardized on tacking through. I find some good tacks, some good ones. My latest is to watch the head stay trace, but I'm looking for kind of visual cues. Is there anything there?
Yeah, I mean, just constantly looking forward and looking for that exit angle is so important. But we'll do a few tacks just to make sure we're all comfortable before the racing, and I'll just visually, or I'll just say, based on my feel of the boat too, and how what I need to do with the main sheet out of the tack. If I thought the tack was maybe a little bit too slow or a little bit too fast, I'll give her that feedback. Yeah, I think it's more of a feel thing. And for me, going into the tack, I like to try to, or throughout the whole tack, I try to keep the main sheet from luffing, or the main from luffing as much as I possibly can. So, if the traveler's down, oftentimes I'll pull the traveler up going into the tack. And then, while rolling the boat, I'll pull the traveler across the boat. I'll take as many big handfuls as I can to get the traveler almost to max, to like basically fill the main on the new tack as quick as possible, minimize the luffing. And then as we flatten, I actually dump the traveler. For me, I would never want to flatten the boat with the boom above center line. In likely times, I'd like to actually, flatten the boat with the boom below center line a little bit and let the boat accelerate. So I pull the traveler up, and I don't know if you can see it, like right as the batten flicks through the backstay, I'm actually dumping the traveler quite a bit. And then once we flatten the boat, like as we're flattening and the boat's coming over us, I then pull the traveler back up to like slow the flatten down a little bit and slow the roll to make sure the boat doesn't over flatten.
Is that so? That's a little bit of a mainsail used to kind of control the rate of turn of the boat itself, right? That's touch on your part.
Absolutely.
Hard to see from the video, but I know what you're talking about. Malakone, the same thing with me.
Yeah, and oftentimes too, if it's going to be like a much lighter air tack, this might sound a little bit weird to people, but I actually will oftentimes ease my main sheet a slightest bit going into the tack, so that my leech isn't super hard coming out of the tack, so that as you're flattening, the leech is going to be a little bit twistier, and it's going to promote that acceleration out of the tack.
Yeah.
The crew, I count down the flatten too. Yeah, so you can see the traveler almost goes like almost down to the bottom of the cockpit for a slight second to help the boat initiate the flatten. And then once the momentum of the boat flattening is coming on, then you can start to get that, start to pull the traveler back up and prevent it from over flattening. But again, I count down into the flatten as well on our boat. I know people do that differently, and but obviously the crew moving across the boat together in these max power conditions is really important. So I'll say 2-1 press, and usually that's for me that's the communication that I use for everyone to note across the boat at the same time.
Great. Super discussion. Taylor, anybody else have anything they want to add?
Yeah, Willem here. I just want to say, Laura, that is the way to tack a boat. All right. You turn the boat perfectly. You cross the boat perfectly. The way you cross your feet, the drone footage is so key. And for any drivers watching this, if you can, the closer you can get to this, I mean, It's like JJ Eisler is driving that boat. It's beautiful tack. You turn the right amount. Really nice job. Flatten. You did a great job. So that's what we want to work. And she's a little smaller. Maybe the bigger guys have to move back just a tiny bit more right before they cross the boat. But the way that her back foot goes to the forward right behind the traveler spot, it's about as good as it can get. So nice job.
Yeah, and I actually
Well,
just have
when
one
you
more
say
tip.
what-
I'm sorry, go ahead, Greg.
No. Well, I was just going to kind of add to what Willem was going to, what he said is that isn't it kind of a normal habit that people get into is for the driver to leave the leeward side earlier than Laura's doing here to get up to the high side. And it kind of takes away from the roll a little bit, right? What she's, as you're pointing out, what she's really doing nicely is staying on the old high side, the new low side until the main almost is filling. So it's kind of cool that she's adding to the roll instead
Right.
of taking away.
She looks like a college sailor to me.
Yeah.
Sailed FJs and rolled the boat like that. So she's a little smaller and maybe more agile than some, but you know, we have to, anything we can roll to help the boat is going to be great. But at some point we got to say, okay, the tack's not right because you're rolling too much. So we all have to adjust to each driver. But I just wanted to let drivers know that they should keep watching this video in the future and try to do it that way. So, nice tack.
Yeah, and one thing to add is you're now allowed to cut your tiller. So for bigger drivers, you know, a lot of people have been, you know, cutting their tiller to the class minimum, which is about 6 inches. So you should think about that as a bigger driver. Give yourself some space, like Willem said, to slide back a little bit.
And final comment from me. One thing that you can watch the video, Laura actually does it really, really well in this is, and I like to do it as well when I'm tacking the boat, is I try to tuck my feet up against the old windward combing before the tack. And that way, when the boat heels over, I almost will lift my heel up a little bit and like put my heel up on the old like cockpit combing. And that way, when the boat heels over coming out of the tack, it's a lot easier to kind of brace yourself to cross the boat. So you see, she puts her foot up on the combing of the boat. And it's a really good way to push off to take that initial step up to the new side.
That's great. That's great. Well, good. Well, the next shot we have, Roy's going to put up is, I think this is Willem going downwind on the wing. And we looked at this already. I think it was Thursday. Maybe it's the same video perhaps, but it's worth Willem talking about it again because it shows how hard he's leaning out to extend the pole, if you will, out to weather, you know, and the difference it makes in the shape of the chute. So Willem, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Okay, so once there's, let's say 8 to 14 knots, now it's really prime wing conditions. And there's two ways to go to a wing. And it's really important that the communication is super clear. So in this situation, okay, we're turning left, jibing the main to wing, switching sides. And so that was the decision to jibe the kite to wing. And then we're jibing very easily, that was jibing the main to wing, and then we jibed the main out of wing once we got to their line. So in a jibing the main to wing, you want to turn slow. You want to throw the main across. You want to pretty much just pull it in, pull it down, and let it out. Because it's one thing in 12 knots in flat water to do it wrong and you still pull it off. But as it gets lighter, that main really affects the kite. So if you pull the boom across too fast, it's going to make the kite collapse. So in a jibing the main to wing, you turn slower, the bow stays on the, what was the low side is now the high side. The trimmer comes under the boom and grabs the sheet before the boom has even come across. So we have lots of weather weight to really help keep the kite flying. Kind of a rule of thumb is as it gets lighter and bumpier, we need more heel. So I'm constantly talking to my team. You can see that picture. If it got a little less stable, I might say, you know, it looks like Ian's hand is on the mast. Like, let's put that hand outboard. Maybe Carlos can put his hand on the boom a little closer to the Doyle logo, and we can get a little more weather weight. And if Carlos is looking back in the pressure, we want to sail the boat a little flatter, which uses less helm. But in the light spots, we really have to heel the boat more to weather. Yes, it's more helm, but we keep the kite flying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if the other move is jibing the kite to wing, arguably easier move, because as a dinghy sailor, putting the weight to weather, you put the weight to weather, you turn faster. Maybe Carlos will say, okay, we're turning faster. Rich, you're going to stay on the same side. I'm going to jibe the kite really quickly, and we're going to turn aggressively, go by the lee. And then as soon as we go by the lee, we're going to, and get the kite flying, we're going to ease the sheet a bunch and head up maybe 30-ish degrees. So there's two different jibing the main to wing. You turn slower, the weight goes to leeward, the boom comes across really slow. You put a lot of weather weight, you get the battens to clean up, but you try to be smooth on it instead of pumping the main. And in jibing the kite to wing, you turn faster. The tactician will tell the driver to stay, because a lot of times the driver will switch sides when you say jibing the kite to wing. So Rich, you're gonna stay on the same side. We're gonna turn faster. We're turning left, jibe the kite around, trim it. The clue comes all the way past the shrouds. We go by the lee to get it to pop, and then we instantly head up and ease the sheet. So there's two very different ways to go to wing. And tactically, you can, there's tons of ways of tactically, okay, we should jibe the kite to wing, or we should jibe the main to wing.
So, Willem, the thing that we also need to, talk about is like your torso and how hard you're working to get it out, but also be in and stay legal, because obviously that's an issue too. So talk about kind of how you try to guide yourself. I know it's hard and painful sometimes, but like in this picture right here, you're a little far out. So talk about that side of things too.
Did we lose Willem? He indicated he was sometimes having some issues with his internet.
No, I'm here. Sorry, my
okay.
bad. So the closer upwind and downwind, the closer you can put your tailbone to the edge of the boat, the more almost impossible it is to illegally hike. So upwind, if I put my tailbone all the way on the edge and I lean against the lifeline, it's pretty much hard to put my torso past the shear line. It's the same thing downwind. If I can ooch my butt, I'm looking forward, but if I can ooch my butt as far to the edge of the boat, pretty much, if you can tolerate the pain, you're probably just right on the edge. Like, I think maybe I'm a little tiny bit out there, but it's close. I see some people stand up on.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, who's driving your main and what's his position as well?
The tactician is up forward. He steps back, throws the main across, squashes. Ideally we all squash together.
Is Ian helping at all with the vang or anything, or not?
Typically a little tiny bit of vang would be put on right there to get the battens to pop a little easier. Ideally we squash, and the driver's turn is sometimes inconsistent. So we squash the boat, and if he comes out too high, we're going to keep the weight to weather, and that boat is going to turn down, down, down. And as soon as it gets to the proper angle in displacement, we split our weight up again. So I saw a lot of teams with 3 or 4 people on the high side in displacement, and it just inevitably forces the driver to sail too high. So you're going higher and the same speed. You're making pretty big loss by having too much weight. So in displacement, it's got to be really clear. Okay, displacement mode, ideally there's 10 to 20 pounds more weight to leeward than to weather, so that the tactician can kind of do the dance.
That's a good point.
Maybe
Excellent.
a lot of times the trimmer and the driver are the two biggest guys. So the trimmer has to scoot in, the driver has to scoot in, and the two other guys have to, maybe the bow person has to just pin himself way down there to leeward so that Carlos, in our case, can move around a little bit in the pressure. The light spots, he can jump to leeward. The pressure, he can help me squash and use the rudder less.
Cool. Cool. Well, excellent. Roy, why don't we go to the leeward mark rounding, and Zeke's this is Team Heaton here this is them entering from the right side of the screen. Nice leeward takedown. So Zeke, can you talk through a little bit of the mechanics and the strategy of rounding the mark and how you guys end up wide, tight, and all that good stuff?
Sure. Well, there's tons of different ways to approach the leeward mark. And I think the trend that everybody's talking about on the call has been the early and very clear and consistent communication. So we try to make sure that, I think it was Taylor saying, just use the same words every time. So I'll try to, as we're coming up to the gate, it's not super close, but, maybe 100 yards away or so, or maybe 200 yards away, we'll just say what it's likely to be. Then as we get a little bit closer, I'll just announce what kind of drop we're going to be doing. So like in this case, that comms would have been, leeward strip, left turn. And that's pretty much it. Or, if it's the other way, we'll say it's a, late weather strip, right turn or something like that. So everybody gets the same communication, knows what's coming. And then in a case like this, we're coming in on a ley line and I'm basically calling for a 180-degree turn, which is about the slowest thing you could do. So not ideal, but it happens a lot. So in this case, we wanted to leave the kite up a little bit later to just give us as much speed as possible before doing that 180-degree turn, which is really slow. So in that case, it would be like a late leeward drop left turn, which it is, the bow's almost, on the rum line before we take the kite down. And then I just try to get with John and make sure that he's feeling really patient. I think it's easy for everybody on the boat, but probably mostly the drivers to, they see the buoy, they want to get as close to the buoy as they can and sail as little distance as possible. But it's really important to try to smooth out the turn and end up really close to the mark. So it's not important to be close to the mark when you're approaching it. It's important to be close to the mark when you're leaving it. So, once the kite's coming down, John can get a visual on the mark. I can get a visual on the mark and try to get the traveler and backstay and everything preset. And then I just try to work with John on, reminding him to stay nice and wide and tight. And then I'll do a countdown like Taylor was saying and say, turning in 3, 2, 1, turning and, heads down in the case where you have to jibe. And that's pretty much it. And I think, always aiming for the wide and tight rounding when you can and just being super patient. One thing I thought was interesting, we talked on the windier days with our two teams about doing the heavy air planing kite takedowns, which can get a little sporty, as we all know. First big tip is earlier is better than later, no matter what. And that's sometimes hard to execute when there's mark room and things to be fighting for, but starting the takedown early. And something interesting Will Felder was talking about was that, he goes and gathers the foot, and usually you want to blow the tack and the pole of the kite first so you can gather the foot and then blow the halyard. But in those windy times, if you're ever struggling, and the person who's pulling the kite in is having a hard time dealing with the load of the sail, he says just blow the halyard, and it doesn't, it unloads everything, and then you can really go hard on pulling the kite into the boat. So if you're ever really fighting to pull the kite into the boat, don't be afraid to blow the halyard, even if it's before the tack and the pole get blown.
See, can I ask something? As you're turning up around the mark like this, is there a different rate of trim on the main versus the jib?
Yeah, I think it's important to have the main in and the jib out to help the upturn. So the jib's nice and twisty there as we're coming around. And I try to always have the main, just a little bit over trimmed maybe, but with a twisty leech so that it's acceleration mode, but so that there's, a lot of bite in the bottom part of the main to help John turn the boat to weather. Definitely it's slow if you're, when you come out of the jibe, if the jib is really tight and you still have 40 or 50 degrees to turn up, that's not helping the driver get the bow up. So the sail trim kind of matching the turn is really important.
Good. Good.
And in fact, I think it helps the driver as well if you kind of can see the luff of the jib just bubbling, and the trimmer should be looking there at the luff of the jib and having it just bubbling until you're up to your kind of final close hauled course, and then you get the final trim on the jib.
Yeah. Good. Anything else anybody wants to add? Okay. Well, good. Zeke, nice job. This next one, Victor, are you with us? So this is, we're going to ask Victor to lead this one because he does a pretty spectacular job of this last, shall we say, 30 seconds to the start. And so we want to kind of start off with this because this is just some good boat handling, some good close combat tactics maneuvering here. And he does a nice job. Pamela does a nice job driving the boat, and they're, you know, directing the boat into the right spot at the right time. And it's impressive to see what they do. But Victor, are you here to kind of talk us through by chance?
He caught a 60-pound fish in Miami. He was told me he was running a little bit late, so
Oh, good.
it's
Okay.
not quite on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who would want to, Jonathan, why don't you take this one, would you? Can you go back and start up? So what I was kind of hoping we would talk about here is just, you know, a little bit of defending, a little bit of attacking, a little bit of keeping the speed up, and what you guys are looking for in that last, you know, wind up to the actual crossing the line, and how you make sure you're in the right mode at the right time at full speed. I know Jonathan had to
Get to dinner, I think, yeah.
yeah, I think he had to go. So Taylor, will you take this?
Yeah, sure. I was just watching. We're like 2 boats above them, and we're actually over early in the start, so not a great one for us. But yeah, Victor and Pamela, and the whole Rosebud team, they did a great job. And it's tough. I think in these conditions, for sure, I think you see in most boats, but I'm a big fan of having the jib out all the time in the lighter conditions. I just think you have a lot more control of the boat, and I think you, from a turning perspective, and also from like a quick acceleration or deceleration as well. You know, if you go head to wind and you're trying to kill speed quick, you know, having a jib luffing is actually a good thing. So, you know, I'm all for the jib out all the time in these lighter conditions from, you know, almost your entire pre-start. But yeah, you know, it's just a fine balance of, you know, trying to find your hole versus, you know, defending your hole versus, you know, figuring out, you know, where you are on the start line. And they do a great job here, just kind of controlling the boat, and also, you know, I think noticing where, you know, when boats are getting too close to the line, and just working to just keep their speed on the whole time, and punch through some, you know, obviously a tough hole here. I think they recognize that, what was it, 1525 was going to be over, or it was too close to the line. It was going to be really slow. So, you know, just putting the bow down, sailing through to lure to them, and keeping the speed on was huge. But for sure, if you get too slow in these light conditions, it's really difficult to reattach the flow over the keel and over the rudder. And I think if that does happen, where you do get a little bit too slow, we talk a lot about it on our boat, is like, you know, just recentering the tiller and making sure that the boat's able to reaccelerate and reattach flow. So I think that's one of the biggest things in the light air. These rudders do detach from the water at slow speeds quite often. So making sure that if you are trying to accelerate and you have lost flow, that you are going to have a straight tiller and like letting the boat accelerate. But yeah, I think
Victor, you want now to jump into? Victor's back
Yeah,
on.
yeah, I'm on. Sorry, guys, I had a little trouble earlier, but I'm on and I'm listening to Taylor's explanation.
Yeah, and then real quick, just like the crew weight is super important as well to be able to turn the boat. You know, as they bear away there, it looks like their boat's heeled to windward, which is exactly what you want. You know, helping the boat carve down, and you know, then as they start to turn back up here, I think you can even see like Victor starting to crouching into the boat to, you know, try to get a little bit of leeward heel. And even like the 2 front guys are sitting on the rail now. Victor's down to leeward, so you know they've done a great job with their crew weight, and that's huge. To, you know, moving your crew rate rather than moving the tiller is a huge gain.
not having to stall the boat any more than you need to is a win for sure.
Good. Pamela sure did a nice job of driving it and not oversteering there, like you pointed out. Well, Victor, what would you like to add here? Because obviously you guys did a great job.
I'll just share some thoughts that, not so specific about the start, but I try to implement every start. When it's so light, I make sure that we have a jib out during the starting sequence for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you maneuverability. And two, it allows you to maintain a higher speed and to accelerate quicker if you come down speed. When it's so light, it's really hard to accelerate. So I am always in fear of losing speed and being stuck without maneuverability and not being able to accelerate quick enough at the actual start. So I always feel like with the jib out and more speed, I have more control on our own destiny. And the next thing that I can mention about the start is that not just this start, but for every start, we're racing the velocity and not so much the boats around us. And for instance, in this start, you can see that a few boats are early, and we're okay with that because we know that they're not going to be able to accelerate past the line. So we kind of hang back, and as the gun gets closer, we now then start accelerating and closing the gap between us and the line. Our goal is to hit the start at 0 seconds and 0 meters full speed. And sometimes when a boat is in front of us, luffing right at the line, we try not to worry about it so much because we know they're going to be sliding at the start and down speed because they're going to have to accelerate at the gun and not before. So just those things are something that I take into consideration. If the fleet's setting up early, I often set a little bow back on the fleet. And then if the fleet's setting up late, then I set a little bit bow forward, and I know my timing based on my velocitech and my meters and my seconds. So basically just focused on my time and distance.
That's good. Willem, you wanted to mention, pinging the line and using the velocitech. Could you do a quick kind of expertise on that?
Yeah, sure. While we're watching this start, I'm looking at 301 on the far right. And I was right next to them. You're going to see us hit them right here. And their main sheet's all the way out. They don't want to be over, and they're reaching down the line. And it's pretty simple to go down a line and at 0, head up and not be over. But you are weather boat fouling, lured boats. And we got to pay attention to learning the relationship between the velocitech. So there's meters and there's time. And in certain wind strengths, we do it all with the jib. Sometimes the jib is rolled up. But regardless, we have to figure out a lot of times you go to a regatta, you watch a few guys doing practice runs at the start line. And what do you know, at the end of the regatta, those are the top 4 boats at the end of the regatta. So they're figuring it out, the relationship between the meters and the time. If the wind is to the right, the meters are going to go quickly. If the pin is favored and the wind's to the left, the meters are going to go slow. And they try to understand that relationship. So they're slowing down early enough. They're not getting all the way to the line with 10 meters and 20 seconds like 301 and just reaching down. We got to figure that out and slow the boat down earlier or bail out. Let's try to go by the rules and avoid those boats. So what happens to a lot of boats out here is they get too close to the line. Sometimes they think the meters are the time and they mix it up, the two. Sometimes I like to put a plus sign by the meters because typically you want to keep the meters bigger than the time unless the pin is just ridiculously favored. So you could put a red tape circle or a mark so you know that's the meters. And as we're coming to the line, maybe at 30 seconds, we have 45 meters. At 15 seconds, we have 23 meters. And we're figuring out this time when we can pull the jib out, bear off, fully accelerate, like Victor said, and be going close hauled, full steam, hold a leeward, options to tack, maybe all that good stuff. But the goal is ideally close hauled and full speed. So maybe at 60 seconds and 60 meters, maybe shortly after, we realize the meters aren't going by. Well, what does that tell us? The pin is favored, jib out, bow down, let's get to the left. And the opposite would be, wow, the meters are flying. Let's stop the boat. Maybe we want to get a little bit to the right. Maybe it's not too late to take a quick 2 hitches and get to the right. So understanding that, and don't get all focused on the other boat. Like, okay, there's a weather boat reaching. He's coming down on me. A lot of people roll their jib out and go attack them. Instead, just stick to your game plan, like Victor said. Wave him across your bow and stick to your routine. So that's all I got to add.
That last point was a really big one, Willem, where you said wave them across your bow. Too often we get into a whizzing contest there trying to beat that boat to weather, where if we backed off the throttle and let them play through, they're going so fast they'll end up way to leeward of us anyway, right?
Exactly. Sometimes I say, hey, you're kind of fouling me. Just go a little bit more to leeward, cross my bow. And then they go a little too far. And then I have this great hole to leeward.
Yeah.
So, try to help these guys that need the help and stick to the machine.
Yeah, that's good. Well, anybody else want to add anything? Zeke, I know you're a champion starter too. What do you think?
No, I think those guys covered everything. I think the most important, well, not most important, but a very important part Victor talked about was like, the goal is not to be turning up on the line and go. The goal is to be having been racing at full speed for the 5 or 6 or 15 seconds before that in some cases. So, just make sure we're clear on what the goal is to call racing and be racing at full speed upwind across the line when the gun goes off, not still turn it up.
Good point. Excellent.
Hey, Ed, Greg, I'll add something else if you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, since we have made the point that we're using the Velocitech and the machine to race to the line, it's really important that we have accurate pings. Otherwise, we're going to be off in our last approach. So in order to have accurate pings, what I like to do is I approach the line at an end so you can know exactly where the line is by being near the end. And then I sail to it very slowly because that gives me a chance to see exactly when I intersect the line. But it also gives the GPS of the Velocitech a chance to update itself when you ping it. If you go too fast, I always worry that by the time I press the button and the machine registers a ping, and then I'm farther upwind of the line, and then I'm going to be over because my pings are wrong. So I like to go slow. And the last thing that I like to do is I like to make sure I intersect the line at the same upwind angle that I will intersect the line when I start, because that gives me the exact offset between the bow of the boat and the machine at the mast to make sure that that my pings are accurate.
Good.
Yeah, Victor, those are great points. I think that the combination of them being not too fast, but also at the angle you want to start at, I think that's huge. And for people to think about what he's saying there. So you don't want to be at full speed because of the fact that, like you said, you want to be accurate. If you're going too fast, when you push the button, you may have pushed it late, that type of thing. But the angle is the other thing. We have another question to this that, does anyone prefer pinging inside or outside of the pin end? Even the boat end, we saw some people pinging, but most likely it's the pin end. Do you ping inside or outside?
I decide to ping inside or outside the ping end based on which way I want to continue sailing. So I think the pin end is really easy to sight through. Then if it's a boat end or if there's a boat ping, or if there's a boat on the leeward end, I always try to ping on the inside because I think it's more accurate than trying to sight the line through a big boat.
Good point.
Great.
Good.
Great. Greg, I think we're getting, pretty close to the time that we were going to do. And what I think I'd like to ask before we let Greg just finish up, is one of the things that we're going to try to work on doing, and we'd love it if, Victor and Willem and Taylor and Jonathan, if we could do some voiceovers of some of these things. And so if we could ask the sailors to give questions of what they would like and what we missed, then what can happen is one of the people that was lined up, that Greg lined up to do the talk in that particular area, could do the video that Roy did an awesome job on, especially his drone ones, and Greg's regular videos do a lot as well. But what we'd like to do is create a library that has the scenarios with one of you experts talking through what's going on, and then that'll create a library for people to go and look later and work on that. So I think the biggest thing is send questions to myself and Greg, and then we'll move forward from there. And I want to thank everyone for the support and the contributions to this. We've had 2 amazing regattas that have gotten better and better because of everybody here, and we want to keep this going. So I think the next one will be just as good, if not better. And then we want to just keep putting ourselves in a position to keep helping ourselves and helping everybody. So I really appreciate everyone. I couldn't really appreciate anyone more. But having the team that I've had with Greg and Roy and Mike, and on my boat with Finn and Holly and Sarah and Chris Howell giving their power boats is made this awesome. So let's just keep pushing us forward, but giving us questions too. The more you guys ask us questions, the more we can do our job. Greg, it's all you to wrap up.
Well, I think we all owe you a huge thanks, Ed, for making this happen, setting the regatta up, following the procedures that you needed to, and making sure we were all doing the right stuff. I mean, few classes are able to sail the way the J70 is, and a lot of that is due to you and your efforts in making it happen. So thank you. And Roy, thanks again for the drone stuff, and Mike for letting Roy do it. That was great. And I just can't say enough what it means to not only the J70 class, but the sport, to have guys like Zeke and Victor and Jonathan and Taylor and, Travis and the whole gang here being a part of this. I mean, these are not only some of the best sailors in the J70 class, obviously they're the best in the world. And to have, these guys, Willem sharing all his points of all the different boats, it's huge. So I think we owe them a huge thank you as well. So thanks, you guys. Thanks for taking the time. They were on it today as we prepared for this thing, and I think they made it a success. So thanks a lot. It was fun. And Ed, thank you again. And good luck in Miami,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. And please communicate. And we will see a lot of people in Miami. We're not doing the same thing. We're just running the bots, but we can do more. And thanks, everyone. This has been huge.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Greg and Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
Nice job. Let's keep growing this fleet. Having fun. Appreciate it.
Super.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
All right.
Have a good night.
Bye.